and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Geun-hye. On today's program, South Korea's political scandal comes to a head with the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye, a fitting end for her term or more trouble ahead. And China marks its 15th year in the World Trade Organization with a plea to abide by a trade status agreement. And we begin today's show in South Korea, where the National Assembly impeached President Park Geun-hye. A big number of lawmakers, 234, voted to impeach Park Geun-hye versus the 56 who voted against. The Constitutional Court will have the final say on the impeachment bill ratification and the president's removal from the office. Park did apologize again for her, quote, negligence and lack of virtue at a time when her country was facing difficulties. Let's take a look.
South Korea's parliament has voted to impeach President Park Geun-hye over a corruption and cronyism scandal. The National Assembly motion passed by 234 votes to 56, way more than the required 200 of the Assembly's 300 members to pass. Park is expected to wait for 9 judges of the country's constitutional court to decide whether the impeachment vote is valid, a process that could take up to 180 days. If 6 of the court's 9 justices support the impeachment, Park will be removed from office and a new presidential election will be held within 60 days.
I will be responding calmly under the procedures laid out in the Constitution and the law to the impeachment review by the Constitutional Court and the investigation by the Special Prosecutor.
Park will hand over power to Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn while the court deliberates on her impeachment. The embattled president has been plagued by political scandals centering on the relationship between her and her confidant Choi Soon-sil. In recent weeks, thousands have poured into the streets to protest Park's stay in power amid the influence peddling scandal.
I was hoping Parliament would pass the impeachment bill. I think this shows the public sentiment is accepted, and it worked out that way.
An amazing thing just happened. We still have the Constitutional Court to review this, but it will happen as people of this country have shown their power and will. Whoever becomes the next leader of this country, I hope we will have a righteous and calm country.
Park belongs to the country's political blue blood, being the daughter of former President Park Geun-hye. In 2012, she ran for president on the platform of a democratic economy and welfare services for citizens, winning with a 51% voters' approval. Latest polls show her approval rating down to 4%, a steep fall in popularity, and with the impeachment, she'd like to get put it out for good from the corridors of power.
For more on the impeachment of South Korea's president, we are joined in our Beijing studio, Mr. Geun-hye, current affairs commentator. In Washington, D.C., we have Bobina Huang, a visiting professor at Georgetown University. She also served as a senior special advisor to the U.S. State Department. Also in D.C., we are joined by Dr. Young-jang Lim, a lecturer of Korea Studies at the Johns Hopkins University of Advanced International Studies. Welcome to the 3 of you for this discussion.
Thank you.
Dr. Lim, since you are originally coming from South Korea, may I start the question with you? What's next after the impeachment decision by the Congress?
Yes, as you already reported, the Constitutional Court will review the impeachment. At max, they can spend 180 days, and once their decision has been made, I mean, we should have the presidential election within the 60 days. The thing is, politically speaking, now every possible candidate, and every party should seriously think about their coming presidential election. I think that's the situations right now, because many of us assume that Constitutional Court, of course it depends on their time, but we feel like, I mean, they will highly likely to pass the impeachment.
Right. Well, if it is about 6 months to the utmost that the Constitutional Court would make a decision, that means, Professor Huang, there is the possibility that the Prime Minister of the current administration will still be the one in the government when a lot of changes are happening. First of all, U.S. President Donald Trump comes into power January. And then there are several other series of events involving the top South Korean leaders with his counterparts from all over Asia and some of the other regions. So what would this mean when it comes to South Korea's decision power in terms of its relations with the most important ally, the United States, and also with some of its neighbors, including China, Japan?
Well, I think that is absolutely a very important consideration. However, we have to understand that especially when it comes to the United States ROK relationship and this alliance, it is actually a far more deeply embedded relationship. There are many bureaucrats, technocrats, and others that behind the scenes have developed the relationship. So in fact, actually, the president is really just the face. So we see this already. This is the transition period, and there are many South Korean officials within the Ministry of Defense, within the alliance relationship, that are already building relationships with the Trump administration to be. So I don't actually expect, I think there to be a very smooth transition regardless of who sits in the Blue House or the Prime Minister's office.
But Professor Huang, there is one unique point some might argue about this new administration coming to power in Washington, that it might be a little bit different when it comes to its way of doing things and saying things. When I say a little bit different, I'm being very diplomatic here. So the communication requires more attention and more efforts, definitely, particularly when Mr. Trump, running for president, asking South Korea to be on its own responsible for its defense, or at least to a certain extent. So once again, I want to put that question back to you, Professor Huang.
Yes, and again, I think you have an excellent point. And I do think this is what, frankly, the entire world is worried about. But to be honest, I think nobody knows, and Mr. Trump, certainly that is part of his characteristic, and perhaps he is purposely trying to cultivate a kind of attitude of uncertainty, unexpectedness. We simply don't know. But again, I do point out that what is more important is, frankly, his selection for the potential Secretary of Defense.
Right.
Now, of course, he has to be confirmed. But if this is the case, again, this sends actually a signal that it is really the bureaucrats and the technocrats, the high-level ones, within the Pentagon, within the U.S. Forces Korea, within the Pacific Command, and all of these others who have had long experience, who will continue to manage the relationship. So again, the leadership at the top is really just the flamboyant leadership. Well, I don't think it'll really affect the day-to-day relationship.
I see your point, Professor Huang. Going to you. Going to you, Dr. Lim. Still, this selection of defense secretary is a general. Of course, that's already very different when it comes to U.S. tradition. But that's not the point. It's what's going on in the U.S. What's important is more with South Korea. Is there going to be a strong enough leadership coming up in South Korea in its new administration that would be able to bargain and negotiate hard with a very different administration in the U.S., and certainly facing a very different situation in Asia with all the moving factors? Dr. Lim, I think that's even more important question for you.
Yes. Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, you're right. As the other panelists already pointed out, things are fluid here too. Many people we still don't know because Mr. Trump was not a professional politician before the election, so we cannot precisely predict what kind of policy directions he's going to show. But as far as I hear, especially in this town from other Asia or Korea specialists, they are almost all of them have kept emphasizing that the alliance relationship with the ROK and with the Japan is very, very important. It's not even kind of negotiable thing. It's not a bargain. It's not a burden. So that's what I heard in this town continuously for the last couple of weeks or even longer than that. So I don't think substantial changes will be made with the new coming administration here in the United States. But you're totally right. The thing is, our the counterpart of the United States. Now the leadership in the Korea is that uncertain, which is pretty unfortunate. But if the process can accelerate it, if so, again, we will have another new president, probably around like a summer. I cannot again precisely predict when it will be, but it will pretty likely to have we're going to have another president in the summer. Right. And the thing is, even though now the opposition leaders can be much more popular or attractive compared to the conservative, but I don't think, again, the substantial changes will be made by even the opposition leaders either. So I think that might be my observations over the situations now. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Gao, in Beijing, China, of course, is a neighbor, and China is observing what's happening in South Korea. There used to be some very strong ties between the South Korean President, Ms. Park, and the Chinese president. However, the issue of that has really become a troublemaker in the relations. And that issue has not been solved even at this time. Meanwhile, you see South Korea, Japan establishing this military exchange mechanism concerning intelligence that puts China, it seems, more question mark about what is the nature of relations between South Korea and China. So having set the stage for you, may I ask you, Dr. Gao, what would be the angles of the observation from the Chinese side? How is China looking at all these possibilities when it comes to new leaders in South Korea?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I would say the ongoing scandal involving President Park of South Korea, as well as the impeachment decision made today, as well as the immediate suspension of his exercise of any function as the president of ROK, could not have happened at the worst time. You mentioned the incoming President Donald Trump in the United States and the worsening of the situation on the Korean Peninsula. And now that South Korea does not have an effective president, and that really adds great uncertainty to the situation. Now, of relevance to China in particular is the allegation that the decision to install the THAAD anti-missile system by the government of the Republic of Korea under President Park actually was intervened with by her private advisors. And that's very disturbing, because if that allegation is proven to be correct, that means that decision in itself may be flawed fundamentally, and I don't think the people in the Republic of South Korea would tolerate such a decision. That means, if of course that allegation is proven to be correct, the whole decision to install that system in South Korea may need to be reviewed. And that in itself should be welcomed by China, but that will really create more uncertainty in relations between ROK and the United States and also
There's a lot of
Japan.
Possibilities that in your answer, but of course we'll have to see how the legal investigation has been going on. Having said that, though, let me go to Dr. Lim. What about that investigation? Now, President Park, well, she is still the President Park until the Constitutional Court ruled otherwise, has been accused by state prosecutor that she has involved in some of the specific illegal wrongdoings of her confidant, whether attracting money from companies for their own purposes or some of the involvement of private confidant in the state affairs, including what Dr. Gao just mentioned about that system. So, Dr. Lim, which stage of investigation are we in? Under the current circumstances, how will President Park be investigated? Will she still have immunity toward the lawmakers, toward the prosecutors?
Yes, again, the things are very uncertain as of now. Again, the prosecution is one thing, and the Constitutional Court is the other thing. These two are, of course, not mutually exclusive, but Constitutional Court's judgments or review of the impeachment is much more about whether or not she violated the spirit of our Constitution, whereas the prosecution, they're going to investigate it on the criminal aspect of prove her wrongdoings if there are anything, right? So these two are actually different track. So we will see these two different tracks simultaneously. I cannot precisely predict which one should be or will be done earlier than the other. So these again, these two things are. I have to emphasize that again, the different from each other. Again, so there are. That is why I cannot again give you the exact timeline as of now. Yeah, but again, the Constitutional Court will again review whether or not the impeachment is acceptable according to the Constitution.
Professor Huang, it is not the first case that the South Korean president was impeached. Earlier, there was also President Roh Moo-hyun. However, he was later reinstalled by the Constitutional Court, suggesting he is not necessarily violating his presidential obligations, only some wrongdoings. But how much chance is there, from your perspective, President Park would have about a reinstallment by the Constitutional Court, if there's anything like that?
Well, it's very difficult to predict, and I certainly wouldn't presume to do so. I do think you are exactly correct in focusing on the fact that this is up to the Constitutional Courts, and it could actually go either way because it really rests on technical aspects of whether any constitutional laws were violated.
Right.
I think actually the more important observation here is to look at how far along South Korea has come as a democracy. It's really very fascinating because the one thing that was most striking and interesting to me, frankly, this time is not that this president, again, is involved in a scandal. In fact, every single South Korean president to date has been involved in some sort of political scandal, which is not good. On the other hand, if you look at the process of the popular demonstrations, it was remarkably peaceful. There were absolutely no incidents of violence, no riots, and this is actually very unique to South Korea.
Right.
So I think that this is actually a positive indication.
Well, we would love
all
to
the
see.
negative
We would
aspects
love
of the
to see
scandal.
the silver lining of the clouds. However, there are some very pragmatic issues that we need to figure out, Dr. Gao. That is, are we seeing the end of a generation of leaders with President Park? I mean, of course, she probably has her own problems when it comes to the ways of governing, when it comes to some of her personal dealing with the issues as prosecutors would investigate. But she is the offspring of an earlier president, well known for getting South Korea out of poverty, but at the same time for being iron fist throughout the administration. And she became a winner of politics consecutively, eventually got her into the Blue House. But the question is, will South Korean establishments, like herself, still be the ones that are likely to come into the Blue House for the future? You see the trends elsewhere changing, the wind blowing differently. What about South Korea, from your perspective, Dr.
I
Gao?
think when President Park won the election and became the president of ROK, there was great expectation for her, and in China there was actually great respect for her as the female president, and as having risen to the top of ROK through her own personal perseverance, despite of great family tragedies. And she actually managed to improve relations between China and ROK quite significantly until the last moment when this third anti-missile system was involved.
Yeah, so what about these generational leaders? Is it going to be a disconnect for the future?
Yeah, and I think there is a little bit of a disappointment to see her downfall, and I wish her all the best wishes, regardless of whatever the outcome. I think her downfall eventually will make it much less possible for the future president of ROK to command as much respect and trust from the people, and that will be a problem going forward, because we cannot afford to have a weak president in ROK or a weak government in ROK, given the possibility of rising tensions on the Korean Peninsula.
That's right. Now, we all understand that part very well. Professor Huang, your take on this?
Yes, I actually think that you make an extremely important and profound observation. I think it's important to remember that in 2013 is when we had the complete shift of new leaderships in all of the major Northeast Asian countries. This included South Korea, Japan, Even North Korea, Kim Jong-un came into power, and of course in your own country, in China, with leader Xi Jinping, and even Putin, what they all had in common was each of these were essentially had historical legacies. There were descendants of their fathers or grandfathers who used to be of past leaders, and so they all have an important historical legacy and a very important desire to carry that on. And I think you're exactly correct. President Park's downfall, and then now with the election of Trump, you know, outside of Washington, I think this could actually signal that the people in Asia and elsewhere are just no longer happy with the old leaders, the elites that are carrying on historical legacies.
Well, it depends on what these people have been doing, isn't it? Their own track record, extremely important.
That's right. Yes,
Dr. Lim, your take on this before we come to the end of our discussion.
Yes. I really feel, as a South Korean national as well, many of us feel real changes should be made soon. Of course, we have been proud of our economic growth, and we have been proud of our political development as well. And the development or state-minded has been working very well, efficiently, effectively. But now it's a totally different situation. The global economy is different, and our society is way different from the Park Geun-hye's period.
Okay.
So that is why I think many people feel that. I mean, that we really should change and finish the old style of our government or our governance style. So I feel, again, that's the South Korean majorities are feeling like that way too. So I'm looking forward to the real changes.
We'll see what's going to happen. We'll have just to wait and see. Dr. Yunjung Lim, Professor Bobina Huang, Dr. Victor Gao Geun-hye, really appreciate the three of you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. China marks its 15th year in the World Trade Organization with a plea to abide by a trade status agreement. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight, coming to you Monday to Friday every day on CCTV News. China marks 15th year as the member of the World Trade Organization. The country says it's fulfilled its commitments and made great strides in exporting its Made in China brand. But as China calls for a more open and free global market, some developed countries seek to reject China's expiring surrogate status. But is it legal for them to say no? Let's take a look.
So agrees.
For the Chinese, the country's entry into the World Trade Organization is a moment filled with cheers, followed by meeting mounting challenges the following decade. When China joined the WTO in 2001, it agreed to let WTO members treat it as a surrogate. That gave trade partners the advantage of using a third country's prices to gauge whether China was selling its goods below market value. That clause is due to expire after 15 years, and China has asked other countries to abide by the agreement.
In accordance with Article 15, WTO members shall stop using the surrogate country approach to conduct anti-dumping investigations on Chinese exports by December the 11th this year. Since then, WTO members shall stop referring to third-party countries in calculating costs in anti-dumping investigations against China.
However, there's a lot at stake for China. Getting market economy would make it more difficult for nations to pursue anti-dumping challenges against Beijing. So now, although more than 90 countries like Russia, Australia, and New Zealand accepted China's market economy status, big trading partners like the US, the European Union, and Japan are debating the issue, questioning if China had done enough to qualify for market economy status, especially in the steel industry.
It's a conversation that we have engaged in, but it is not one at this moment that is ripe for us to change our protocol.
According to Article 15 of the accession protocols, the legal foundation for treating China as a non-market economy will lapse on December 11. China says whether it has met other countries' own market economy standards is irrelevant.
For a small number of members who insist on using surrogate country approaches after December the 11th, China will take necessary measures in accordance with the WTO rules to firmly protect our own legitimate rights.
Recognition as a market economy, meanwhile, would force trading partners to use domestic Chinese prices as a baseline for judgments about export prices, limiting their ability to impose trade restrictions. Over the past 15 years, China has reshaped the global economic landscape. That's particularly true during the global financial crisis that started in 2008, when China's continued growth became a stabilizing factor and a catalyst for the world economy's recovery.
And for more discussion on WTO, we are joined in our Beijing studio Jiang Jianping, Director General of the Center for Regional Cooperation with Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Also here in Beijing, Mr. Tu Xinchuan, Dean and Professor of China Institute for WTO Studies in the University of International Business and Economics. Meanwhile, in Washington, we have Nicholas Lardy, a Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Welcome to the three of you. Well, certainly WTO has changed China much. China has also made its contribution to the WTO framework. Having said that, though, the biggest issue now is market economy status or not. Mr. Zhang, from Chinese perspective, should China be granted? On what basis?
Actually, I think that so-called full market state status issues that's belonging to actually domestic laws field in some of countries. For example, in EU or in Japan, domestically they have their relative laws. But for surrogate country, this type of things decided by 15th section in WTO text. Actually, that's the critical point that is focusing on by maybe after 2 days for those countries they cannot use this type of terms to make assessments on those products price in China. So I mean actually I think that for China now our position is that we hope all countries can make Section 15 implemented instead of.
Is it a hope or is it a must?
I think it is a must. This is a legal obligation for all WTO members. According to the Article 15 in the China's WTO accession protocol, up to December 11 this year, all existing this kind of discriminatory approaches to anti-dumping against the Chinese products should be eliminated.
Right.
So I think this is a legal obligation for all WTO members.
Mr. Lardy, of course, the most important thing, China does not want to be the victim of the anti-dumping accusations coming from other economies, and China wants all the other economies that are members of the WTO to observe that specific clause. So, on what legal basis should people abide by that, or on what legal basis they are using now to get themselves away from that obligation? Look at China as market economy status.
Well, I think a straightforward reading of the protocol shows that the use of surrogate countries in anti-dumping cases should be discontinued beginning December 11th this year. There are some legal experts who, in my opinion, through a very kind of contorted reading of the document, say that it doesn't really mean what it says, and that there's no requirement to recognize China as a market economy. I think this. I think if the United States does not live up to its international obligations and continues to use surrogate countries in anti-dumping investigations, that China will take the United States to a dispute settlement in the WTO, and I think it's very likely that China would prevail. Because of that, I think it's very unfortunate that the United States is not agreeing to accept China as a market economy.
All right.
By the way, let me say, even if countries don't use the surrogate method, the third party pricing, there can still be anti-dumping investigations against Chinese products, but these investigations will have to be based on the prices prevailing in China rather than based on the prices prevailing in a third country.
Mr. Tu, what do you think?
Yes, I agree with Mr. Ladi's opinion. I think, as he said, actually, it is very clear in the protocol that this surrogate country methodology should be discontinued in this year. But some countries, some members want to use their own explanation of this article. But as I know, and when I talked with many legal experts, WTO experts, they believe that this clause is very clear, that China should be treated as a normal WTO member after December 11 in anti-dumping investigations.
What can China do, really? Is WTO really going to help China? Meanwhile, it would take a while before the WTO made its final rule. So what would that mean for China?
Yeah, you know that after this deadline, I think that China will become a normal, WTO members because this, Section 15. That means actually in WTO, families, actually China actually is facing with a certain of discrimination. That means China is not a full market status, and then other countries can have their anti-dumping on China's products, something like that. But after this deadline, I think that China can enjoy our WTO membership. Also, we will be the normal.
Mr. Lardy, if countries are not following what they have agreed upon in the legal document, if cases like this, whether or not people should follow what they have agreed upon, become such a big issue within WTO, will WTO still be relevant for the future if it has so low level of negotiation, shall I say, on this very commonly agreed issue? Will WTO be still relevant as the most respected international trade mechanism?
Well, I think it will be more relevant than ever, not less. It'll be more relevant because one of the best features of the WTO is the dispute settlement process. Many of these documents are very complicated and are open to somewhat different interpretations by different experts. And so when there's a division of opinion, the way you resolve it is to go to dispute settlement. So if the United States continues to use the surrogate country method in anti-dumping investigations against Chinese products, China, I hope, will take the United States to dispute settlement. And as I said earlier, I think it's quite likely that China would prevail. If China would prevail and the United States did not change its approach, then the WTO would authorize China to impose sanctions on imports of U.S. products into China. This is a very good way of resolving disputes, to have an impartial body with well-established procedures, look at all the evidence and come up with a determination. It is true, it takes too long, it's a cumbersome process, but I think the value of the WTO goes up when there are disagreements about how to interpret various provisions of different documents.
Of course, that's one thing, the surrogate countries or not. The other thing is, Mr. Zhang, what about some of the rhetorics of some of the current day's politicians suggesting, for example, Mr. Donald Trump, the incoming president of the United States, 45% tax on all Chinese imports? Of course, maybe the national politics wouldn't allow him to follow suit, but rhetorics like that, I mean, how much should we understand WTO for member states and leaders of member states to understand under what circumstances they're exercising their power, whether to talk or to act?
So actually, United States is a very important member of WTO. Of course, those tariffs on all of those products, U.S. has to follow rules and regulations made by WTO. So that means in case they want to increase tariff level, so that means they have to have a procedure, their internal procedures, such as United States Ministry of Commerce and their international trade commissions will have their procedures. So that means maybe by different products, and they can have their evidence to show China's products, Chinese government provided subsidies, or they sold those products with lower prices, and then they have to have evidence, and then they made their decisions. So that means it would be impossible for them to take take a high tariff level for all products. Maybe, but I deeply worry about in the near future, maybe trade friction between China and the U.S. becomes more and more.
What about WTO members, Mr. Lardy? If 45%, not even 45%, let's just say much lower, or some other kinds of trade war between China and the United States, what would that mean for WTO as a mechanism? After all, these are the two biggest economies now in the world. And how do you think the WTO mechanism would be able to enable member countries, China included, to be able to fight for its own integrity and also its legal rights? And what would that mean eventually for a big fight between the two economies within WTO?
Well, over the years, there have been many cases in which there have been big fights. They've gone to dispute settlement. And sometimes, for example, the United States has not agreed to follow the recommendation or the requirement of the dispute settlement process. And in those cases, the United States has agreed to pay compensation to the country that brought the case. So something like this could also happen in the Chinese case. The Chinese could be compensated for the fact that their imports into the United States are still subject to the surrogate country methodology in anti-dumping investigations. So I think it's a very useful process. I think China has an exemplary record. As far as I know, every case that has been decided against China, that the ruling was that China was doing something inconsistent with its obligations, China has changed its practices to come into compliance with the dispute settlement decision.
Right.
I think that's an exemplary behavior on the part of China, and helps to support the viability of the international trading system.
It's been 15 years since China joined the WTO. In the past decade and a half, China has really enjoyed the advantages of opening up. As a result of this, the country saw its GDP growing from over $1 trillion in the year 2001 to over 10 trillion in the year 2015. Trade volume increased by over 8 times, and foreign direct investment nearly tripled in the past 15 years. Of course, China enjoyed the benefits of WTO, so do many other countries. But now we see, Mr. Tu, there is the possibility that others might throw away what they have agreed upon in WTO and suggesting they only want to have another kind of trade mechanism. I wouldn't want to put TPP because it is already not necessarily a mechanism of hope at this point politically. But what if some new political leaders coming into power and suggesting, let's just throw WTO away, let's do something else because we're an influential economy and therefore we want to do whatever we want. And Mr. Tu, what would that mean? Is WTO going to be strong enough to endure these kinds of political shakeup?
Well, I think the WTO already has a very long history since the end of World War II. This has taken a lot of efforts from all these members, including the United States especially, I think. So I think it is very unlikely or difficult to give it up or at all. And now the WTO has more has 164 members around the world. And it has a very wide range rules based on agreements among all members.
Right.
So, of course, there will be some brave men will propose make some ambitious proposals, maybe. But I think the world needs the WTO.
But actually, I just
Briefly.
add, TPP or RCEP, those mega FTA actually belonging to exemption case of WTO. Actually, WTO is supporting those bilateral and multilateral free trade agreements that will benefit for both trade and investment liberalization and facilitation.
I used to interview Mr. Lardy, the former Director General of WTO. He said he loves the Chinese quote, whether it's black cat or white cat, as long as it catches the mouse, it would be a great one. So, Mr. Lardy, how much do you think WTO would coexist with all the other kinds of mechanisms? Are there hopes of new and inspiring mechanisms, regional and even international, also side by side with WTO?
Well, the WTO, which is a multilateral organization, has existed alongside bilateral and regional agreements for decades, and I think that pattern will continue. I think, as an economist who believes in the benefits of international trade, I always support the multilateral approach that brings the most benefits to the most countries. But sometimes you can't move ahead in the WTO, and then it's worth exploring whether a smaller subset of countries can liberalize. Certainly the TPP was a very good example of that.
We'll see what's going to happen later. Thank you so much, the three of you, for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more program, visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tianwei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. Have a great weekend.